Can you see Stella in frame? Is your little head in frame? Hello, welcome back to another video. I want to keep doing these. I think they're fun. I don't really care if I get a lot of views or not. It's just kind of fun, and it'll be interesting to look back on these later on in life and see what was I reading when I was 23 years old and what was really impacting me. So today I'm going to do something that I've seen on a couple other booktubers, which is ranking books that I've read, but I'm going to do a little twist on it. I'm going to do ranking the books that I have in my room, although most of them are in boxes because I'm moving soon. I do think it'd be cool to rank all of the books that I still own and why I still own them, especially since because I'm moving I've gotten rid of a lot of books, so I wanted to rank like why am I keeping these books and why I want to keep them forever. Ooh, I got a text message. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I don't have a capture card, so I can't do this how normal people have done it, or maybe I can, I just don't know how, so I've done it in a really interesting way. I've taken screenshots, I already made the list, and I'm going to go back over it. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way to the top.
Hi, so I'm editing this right now, and I realized if I kept my bottom tier in, this video would be about 40 minutes long, and I think it's already going to be a pretty long video. So I went ahead and I cut the me discussing the bottom layer, but I will go ahead and post the full tier later on. I just didn't want people watching like hour-long video, especially when it's just the bottom layer is me discussing books that I haven't read yet.
Okay, now for the next tier, which is I'll have to reread. These are two books, really simple, that I have to reread to see if I want to keep them or give them away. They're on my to reread list. The first is The Last Song. I remember reading this in middle school and loving it, which is why I've kept it so long. However, I haven't read it since middle school, so we'll see. And then there's Red Riding Hood, which is also another one that I think was an interesting fantasy that I really liked. But I don't know. I'll have to reread it to see. Now, the next tier is like, I'm unsure if I should unhaul these books and give them to the library or if I want to keep them for myself. The first is The Rule of One. Now, this was a fantasy series, and I don't think I'm going to finish it. I have the first two books, and the third book comes out soon, but it just wasn't what I wanted. The writing was really fast-paced, which sometimes isn't too bad. The problem was I didn't care about the characters. Like, the characters were just not, but I just feel kind of bad because I wanted to like it so much, so I kind of put it on here to maybe give it a second chance. But yeah, I'm not sure. Then We Are Dark Fire, or We Are the Dark on Fire. Sorry, I couldn't read. A reader who can't read. We Are the Dark on Fire. Again, I thought I really liked it because I believe it had an LGBT aspect to it, and I was really into that. But also, I'm not too sure I want to finish this series. I don't remember it exciting me. Then there's Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This one, the story wasn't okay. It wasn't great. It was one that I probably would read again, and I do like the illustrations in the edition that I have. However, I'm not too sure I'm obsessed with it or into the story. Yeah, anyway. Then there's the Song of Achilles. I loved the LGBT aspect of it. But then there was also, it wasn't greatest writing. I don't know. I remember really liking it when I read it, and then after sitting on it, I was kind of like, I don't know. Next is, oh, so the last two are not books that I didn't like. I actually loved both of these books. They're just books that I don't know if I'll read again because of how dense they were, in the sense of they had a lot of information, and I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever read them again, or if there will be a time. I'm still keeping them for right now, but yeah, they're on my unsure list. So the first is The Skeleton Crew. It was a really interesting book. However, it was so dense, it took me about a good month to get through because I had to read it little by little. And then there's Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, and these are a collection of essays. I think why I'm unsure about this one is I had to read it for school, and I remember the class that it was associated with. I didn't really have a great professor, and I didn't like that professor, so I think that's kind of what's hindering me on that one. So again, I actually probably should have put this on reread. I want to go ahead and reread it. I do remember it being a little dense in the sense of it was a lot of information at once, but that's not always a bad thing. And who knows, I may reread it many times in the future. All right, so the next tier is Guilty as Charged. These are books that are not necessarily great writing, but I love them, and they are guilty pleasure reads, even though I'm not guilty about them. So the first is Dance of Thieves. It was so cheesy. It's a cheesy young adult fantasy duology, and the first one is not as bad as the second one. But when I tell you that the romance is just, it's so cheesy, it's so bad. There were parts where I cringed, but I loved it. I'm not getting rid of this one, at least not for a while. Then I have the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society book. Again, it's not that amazing of a novel. However, it's really cute, and I love the Netflix movie version of it. So yeah, it's just cute, and I think it's a really nice beach read, like summer beach read, because it's really fast. It reads really fast. It's told in a bunch of letters. Then Wilder Girls. Now this one is kind of interesting to read during a pandemic because it is about a plague, and I don't know if, so why this one bothers me, but also I love, is I don't know if there's going to be a second one. Like, I don't think it's been announced. And it leaves off on a cliffhanger, like a huge cliffhanger. And you care about these characters so much, and it's a really interesting read, and actually would probably make a really good TV show. But I don't know if there's gonna be a second one. I need help. Okay, anyway, then Carry On. Okay. This is so cheesy, and this actually ties in with the last one of Fangirl. They're by the same author. This one is the fan fiction that the lead character in Fangirl is writing, and it is fantasy and about werewolves and vampires and wizards, and it's so bad, but so good. I loved it. I loved it. I read it in a day. It's 500 something pages, and I read it in a day. Next is Circe, same author of the Song of Achilles. Again, not the greatest of writing, but I liked this one better than Song of Achilles. And I don't know, I just really liked Circe as a character. Some people have different opinions, but I really liked it. Then we have Glittering Court, which is by one of my favorite young adult authors when I was younger. I loved the Vampire Academy series. I loved it more than Twilight. Everyone was on about Twilight, and I was on about Vampire Academy, mainly because I just loved the lead character, Rose. So this is another series by the same author, and each book in the series is different. It follows a different character's perspective and a different character's story, and I really like it. Glittering Court, I like all three. I'm keeping all three. Really great. Then we have the Raven Boys, another like fantasy. It was a bit confusing at the start. I remember not getting into, like, the first book was really hard to get through, and the only reason I got through it was because of the characters. But by the third and fourth book, I loved it. It's a good series. It's one I'm keeping for a while. I remember reading Maggie Stiefvater's, is that her last name? Oh, no. I remember reading her book Shiver, and I loved that series, so this one was really good. I love the characters more in this series, too. I think they're just also interesting and fun. So then the next tier is It's a Classic, which means I don't really have any particular feelings one way or another, and I'm probably just keeping the book because it's a classic. The first is the Odyssey. It's just so hard to get through, and I love Greek mythology, and it's still hard to get through. Then there's The Alchemist, which I didn't dislike, but I also wasn't a huge fan of, like, just mainly because it's so simple. I mean, it reads more as a children's story than anything. It's a classic. I won't get rid of it, but it's also not, like, the greatest book I've ever read. King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, I just have a really cute version from Barnes & Noble. Not necessarily a great read, but then Oscar Wilde's short stories. I really liked some of them, and then others I couldn't finish. So again, do with that what you will. I love Oscar Wilde as an author. I think he's brilliant, but yeah, I wasn't too, I'm not sure with his short stories. Then Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, again, not a bad story, but just kind of one I found myself not really caring to finish. And then Brave New World, which I think is actually a really good science fiction fantasy novel, but I had to read it for school, and there were some things that I had problems with in the story itself. And I don't know, it's a classic. I won't be getting rid of it, but I'm also not going to say it's my favorite book of all time. So the next tier, pretty decent. These are pretty decent books. They have pretty decent stories, pretty decent characters, and they're not the greatest thing I've ever read, but they're also not ones I'm going to be getting rid of anytime soon. So When She Woke, this is a lot like The Handmaid's Tale, however told in a to me, a more religious aspect, which I always think is interesting in a novel. I talked about in my favorites video how much I love learning about other religions and cultures. This one was really fascinating because in The Handmaid's Tale, it's more about how the government controls things, and they use the Bible as a way of policing the citizens. But in When She Woke, it's really like about that religion aspect and how the religion has taken over. It's really good. I think it's really clever. I think that the Handmaid's Tale and When She Woke are two kind of separate entities. You can enjoy them both. I do. That's why The Handmaid's Tale is also on this list. The Princess Bride, again, classic movie. Love that movie, but the book is also really good, really cute. Then we have the Red Pyramid series, which is a Rick Riordan series, and one that I think often gets overlooked. A lot of people don't like it for some reason, but I loved it. It's about Egyptian mythology, which I think is fascinating, and I really liked the characters in it. I thought it was cute. And again, it's a fast read, but I really liked it. And then The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This is one that I contemplated putting on the It's a Classic list, but why I put it in pretty decent is because I think people will read it and be like, oh, it's really simple and it's simply written. But if you look at what the subject matter is and the fact that our lead character is autistic, it makes a lot of sense in the writing style, and I actually think the writing style then is really creative and interesting. It's also a play now, which I saw and loved, but the book itself is also not a bad read whatsoever. Then The Rise of Kyoshi. This should have probably been a guilty pleasure read, but I still love it anyway. I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of the most brilliant series of all time, even though it's animated, and my stepdad will come for me for saying it, saying that because he thinks it's just a kid's show, but I think it deals with a lot of themes, and it has really good representation, and the character arcs are really important. I love Avatar: The Last Airbender. I will talk about it constantly. The Rise of Kyoshi was an amazing book. I'm anticipating the second novel to come out. I thought the writer did a great job of writing a story that you could read without having known the series. I just think it's a really good book. Some people disagree with me, but that's okay. Everyone has their own opinion. I really think it's pretty decent and I love it. We Hunt the Flame. I remember reading this in just a day. Like, I loved this book. I don't remember much about the story itself, but I remember loving the lead character a lot. So I'm actually going to go ahead and reread it once I'm finished with all my to-read books. So yeah, there's that. There's The Black Klansman, a nonfiction book that was turned into a TV show. Also pretty topical for the times right now. It's hilarious. It's so well done, and you also, again, feel like you're having a conversation with the author. I love it. I recommend it. It's a really fast book. I finished it in a day. It's so thin. It's only like 100-something pages. Killers of the Flower Moon. Now, this was a book that actually took me a long time to get through, mainly because I got really angry. Not at the book itself, but at the people in the book, specifically the white people. And I say that because it is about the killing of Indigenous women and how basically we did nothing to help. It's a really good novel that goes into how the police do not look into the deaths of people of color or Indigenous people. And it's a read that I think everyone needs to read, and you will get very mad throughout it and understand why you should be mad and should be speaking up right now. Next is Nocturna. This one was really cute and interesting, and what I loved about it is that a lot of the phrases and a lot of the speech was in Spanish, and it was English and Spanish, but she didn't give, so this might turn some people off from it, but I loved it. She didn't give translations for her dialogue in Spanish, so I had to go and look up in Spanish or ask my grandma who speaks Spanish, and I loved that. So I annotated the book like crazy with what the Spanish translation was, and I like that she was she wasn't about to just make it easy. And yeah, I remember loving the story as well, and the characters are great. Oh my gosh, I Capture the Castle. This is the cutest book. It is just so sweet. Not a lot happens in it. I'm gonna say that. It's not that great of a plot. However, the lead character who tells this story from her perspective, and it is written as her journal, she is so cute, and you fall in love with her, and I think that's why I loved it so much. It was just so, I loved her as a character, and again, nothing really happens, but c'est la vie. The Handmaid's Tale, pretty speaks for itself, I think. Bridge of Clay, which is by Marcus Zusak, who also wrote The Book Thief, which is on my Never Gonna Give You Up list, we'll get to that eventually. Fantastic. So it starts off really slow, actually. It takes about 100 pages to really get into it, but then you start getting into it, and it's a character novel. It is about the characters. It is not really about the plot, and sometimes these can go really, really poorly, but I'm gonna adjust. Okay. Yeah, I just think it was really good. It deals with a family and their relationships, and I just think it's a really good character novel. Next is Bitter Blue. So I separated, Bitter Blue is technically part of a series, but because they're told from separate points of view and kind of take place in different areas, I separated the three and put them in different lists together. So Bitter Blue is the third novel of this series. I loved it, but it wasn't the best in the series. Enough said. Then there's The Heroes of Olympus. Everyone, like, I love Percy Jackson. I talked about that. This is the sequel series to Percy Jackson. I think you can always have problems with sequel series just because people love the original characters so much. I think it was interesting, and I definitely am keeping the novels for a very long time, but it wasn't my favorite. Still pretty decent, still pretty interesting, but not my favorite. Then Fahrenheit 451. I'm contemplating putting this on the It's a Classic list, but I remember loving this book in school, and I never really liked books in school when I had to read them for school. So Fahrenheit 451, I remember just being appalled, and I think it was the first sci-fi fantasy novel where I really was like, that could happen today. And what would happen if it happened today? Next is The Scarlet Letter. Again, another book you read for school. I think it's a fascinating story. I also think that it's one that doesn't get highly recommended often. And I don't know, I thought it was a pretty decent story. I also just think Puritan times were buck wild. So reading about Puritan times is always buck wild. And yeah, I think it's cool. We stan Hester in this household. Now is my highly recommend. These are above pretty decent, but below the best books I love. My top tier, I'm probably not going to go into as much because I did a video about a lot of these books. So, next, highly recommend Graceling. This is the first book in the series that I was talking about with Bitter Blue. Amazing, fantastic. I loved it. I still love it. My cover is breaking because of how many times I've read this book. Next is Scythe. Now this is a story that is so interesting. This is a sci-fi young adult novel that is just so clever and really deals with the idea of death. And it might not be great to read during a pandemic, but oh boy, is it one of the best books I've read in a long time. Honestly, I should have probably put it in my top tier, because I just really love it. Then there's Red Queen, which might shock a lot of people because it's not in my top tier. But as I was doing this, I was kind of like, I love it, but maybe one day I might not anymore. Who knows? Then we have Dante's The Inferno, another classic story that I think is mind-blowing, brilliant. I love reading this and annotating this. My copy is just full of notes. I could never lend it out because it's full of notes and highlighting. Then The Picture of Dorian Gray. Love Oscar Wilde. Love a good gay subplot. Enough said. Then Ender's Game, which is a really good sci-fi novel. I think it's meant for children, but I don't know. I loved it. Next is The Fourth Bear, which is the second novel in the Big Over Easy series. It's also the last one. I wish he had written more. I talked about those two in my favorites video. I think they're hilarious. It's hilarious. It's beautiful. It's not like classic, but they're hilarious. They're really well done. Then Ready Player One, again, highly recommend, one of my favorites of all time. Will it be one that I'm gonna love forever? Who knows? Then Good Omens, a fantastic book. cracked me up. I watched a video where someone said that Good Omens wasn't that good, and a part of my soul kind of died because I thought it was so creative and interesting and different, but also so funny. And you just love the two lead characters like a lot. I don't know. I think it's really good, and that's my personal opinion. Next is The Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson, which I am currently reading, and I mentioned before, it reminds me a lot of Chalk Zone, which was a TV show I used to read. There are some things that I'm kind of like, because it's written for a child, like it's a children's novel. So the characters are 16, but they kind of read that they're like 11 or 12, the way that they talk. However, still really funny and really creative. I love the world that he's created. I like that everything is described to you. It's not hard to understand. Yeah, it's really well done. Then we have Fire, which is the second book in the Graceling series. That's what I'm going to call it because I don't remember what the whole series is called. But Fire, I remember this one being my favorite of the three. Like, I loved Fire. It's also one that I have reread so many times. My book cover is cracked. Yeah, just fantastic. And then I have Children of Blood and Bone. I cried, and I read the second book, and it gives you so many feels, and it's so well written. It's so beautiful, and the characters are fantastic. Also, the magic element and like the story itself is so well done and so well thought out. I have no complaints. Then I have Six of Crows, which is a duology. I like the second book, Crooked Kingdom, better. That is a tongue twister. However, I still think both of them are amazing books. The characters, every single one, just fantastic. I love them. It's honestly one of my highest recommended series. Now we have my Never Gonna Give You Up tier. These are books that you'll probably recognize from my favorites list, but I also have a couple that I didn't mention because I was going to mention them in my sequel video. So the first is An Ember in the Ashes. When I tell you, this is one of the best young adult fantasy novels I have ever read. This series is so different and interesting, and the characters, I mean, it has it all. It has the plot, it has the characters, it has the world, it has the magic element, it has everything. It's so good, and if you haven't read it yet, you need to read it, and if you did read it and you didn't like it, I know I say everyone has their own opinion, but you need to fix your opinion. Alias Grace. Enough said, I talked a lot about it. Hunger Games. This should speak for itself. I think it's an amazing trilogy series. I think that it deserves all the hype that it has gotten. Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. The Book Thief, talked so much about that. To Kill a Mockingbird. Again, first novel that my mom ever read to me. Really love the story. A fantastic book. I think it's classic, and I think it's a classic for a reason. The Testaments. This is the sequel to Handmaid's Tale, and I separated these because I actually think of them as two separate books. Yes, they take place in the same world, but I don't really see it as a sequel because we never really see, the only character we see is Aunt Lydia. If you've read Handmaid's Tale, that is the only character you ever see from the original series. And I liked this book more. I loved it. One, I think there was more justice. Two, I loved the characters a bit more. I love June. I think June's an amazing character. I think that The Handmaid's Tale is a brilliant story. However, I loved The Testaments so much. And I think everyone should read it. And You don't have to know The Handmaid's Tale to read this book. Brilliant. Okay. The Hobbit, a classic, beautiful. You might have noticed I didn't have Lord of the Rings on this tier. I have not read Lord of the Rings. No. It is on my to-buy list along with the rest of the Harry Potter series. Please do not come for me. Okay, anyway, The Hobbit. Love it. Amazing book. Just goes to show why I should read the Lord of the Rings series. Next is, you can't tell because there is the icon in the way, is Pride and Prejudice, another classic. Love it. Will always love it. I am a sucker for a period drama romance. I am a sucker for it. But I think what makes me love Pride and Prejudice more than some of the other classic romance novels is that I love our main character so much. Elizabeth is a beautiful character and a strong woman, which you didn't find often in books those days. And yeah, I just think it's... Then Renegades, I already talked about this. Love this book. Did I talk about Renegades? Yes. Yes. I better have talked about Renegades. Great book. Percy Jackson. Enough said. We'll never get rid of it. Jane Eyre, another novel that some people actually don't like. Jane Eyre is one that is usually 50-50, but I love it. Jane Eyre was actually my first classic novel that I read, and it's so good. I love Jane Eyre. I think I like it a little more than Pride and Prejudice, actually. I just love Jane. She's my baby. Then Anne of Green Gables. Again, talked about this. Love Anne of Green Gables. I'll never let it go. And I'll Be Gone in the Dark. Again, I talked a lot about this one. I think it's one of the best books I've read ever. And yeah, that's my list. That's my list, guys. That's it. Thank you for staying this long. Next, I'm probably going to do the worst books I have ever read, followed by a part 2 of my favorite books of all time, which you kind of got a sneak peek of today. So anyway, if you want to start a conversation, just let me know. Let me know what you think about this list, and yeah, I hope to hear from you. I hope that you like it, and thank you for watching. Okay, whoa, I talked a lot.